Hey guys, welcome back to another little Artdoll video. So today's video we are going to make a leopard seal with movable jaw. So yeah, this is quite a big doll that I have made. I didn't actually mean for it to turn out so big, but alas, we are here. It turned out big. That's what happened. So we've got the movable jaw. We've got it nice and sealed inside. And you got all the detailing, including the teeth, the tongue and everything, and of course it is movable. I really like the way the head turned out. It just turned out really big, which I didn't mean for it to happen. So but sometimes, you know, the big dolls are kind of cuddly, right? The body, obviously the head is sculpted out of polymer clay, the teeth and everything polymer clay as well. It's got the joint inside to make it posable. The body is made out of a minky fabric. So I tried something a little different rather than using faux fur for this one, because seals obviously have very different fur to a lot of the other animals that I make. So yeah, I did a minky fabric which I airbrushed all of the pattern work into, including, you know, the tail, the fins. So it's kind of got like a really great mottling effect on the body. So yeah, spent a bit of time doing the mottling on that. The fins, or the rear flippers, they're soft, so I've sort of fabric sculpted them to replicate those little fin detailing work. I did put an armature inside it, so they can be sort of posed and closed off a little bit. You just have to play around. It's a really weak sort of armature. It's not anything too spectacular. It just allows like a really short amount of posing. So it was just sort of an experiment, nothing too practical, I guess. So yeah, they're posable. It's got the ball and socket armature inside them, so you can sort of spread them as well and pose that. But yeah, so this guy is available in my shop, creaturesofnat.com, and payment plans are also welcome. So just shoot me a message for any of my dolls that you want to talk about a payment plan. I'm really flexible with the way that works. So yeah, it's my first little seal that I've made. So what better seal than the leopard seal? And hopefully, yeah, I've managed to capture the feistiness of the leopard seal. But yeah, if you want to see how I made him, and then just keep watching. Alright, so we are starting off by making a movable jaw for this leopard seal. So I've coloured up a custom colour with my Sculpting, which I use just a tiny bit amount of red acrylic paint, and just blended it in while I was conditioning the clay, just so it's this nice sort of custom apricot sort of colour. So basically we needed to do the movable jaw in 3 parts. So I'm starting off by doing the lower inner part of the jaw, which includes the gum line and the teeth. So I'm using this custom colour for the gum line, and then I'm going to be using some translucent Sculpting for the teeth. So I've just sculpted a rough shape of how I want the lower part of the jaw to look. And this mapping out where I want the teeth to sit. So I'm doing a little indentation with my ball tools, just so the teeth have somewhere to sit and I can incorporate them into the head. So I've rolled out some of my translucent Sculpting into rough shapes of the teeth, and I've got reference images up on my computer next to me to make sure that I'm getting it all symmetrical and right, and just making sure I am getting these teeth in the right place as well. So the placement is sitting right. So there's a bit of prep work before we can start adding the teeth in the jaw. So then we can start adding the teeth in basically one at a time, making sure that it is nice and adhered to the clay itself. I'm using a little needle tool to make sure it's incorporated properly. And then I'm going to bake this once it's been finished. So a little pre-bake just to lock in the sculpture before I move on to the next part. And going in and making those canine teeth, I don't want to make them too big, so I'm just comparing them to the reference images that I have up on my computer. I don't want a huge tooth for this one because it makes it hard for the jaw to close, and it doesn't look right. And then we can start working on some of the teeth that go around the back of the jaw. So these teeth have a little bit of a trident shape to them, so it's a fun thing to sculpt. I didn't want to put too much detail into it because it is such a small detail, so less is more sometimes. So I've just done like a really rough trident shape, and I'm just mapping out where I want these teeth to fit, so they're not too crowded and they all fit nicely. So I'm just rolling really basic shaped balls just to get the amount of clay even. And I'm doing that for all of the teeth, and I'm going to be putting on here just to make sure I'm getting the right size, using the same volume of clay. It's easier to get the same shaped teeth when you're using the same volume of clay. So just doing a little bit of prep work before I start sculpting. So I'm doing the rough trident details with my needle tool just off the jaw, and then I'm going to place it into the little groove that I made, and I can start doing a little bit more refining once that's on there. And then same deal with the other side, just do it all over again and make sure it's sitting symmetrically. Now for the tongue, I am getting some of the same coloured Sculpey that I did. I need a little bit more here, so just going to do a rough tongue shape and then do all the detailing once I put it into place. It's a nice sort of chunky tongue, and it's the same colour as the rest of the gum line, so that makes it really easy. And then I'll do the detailing with my needle tool once it's put into place. So I just basically shape it out with my fingers into a rough tongue shape and then stick it on. So just using my little needle tool to go in and create some of those little tongue detailing works, not too sandpapery like a cat, but just a little bit of texture just to make it a bit more realistic. So once I'm happy with that, I just do a quick little bake session just to lock it into place, and I can start working on the upper jaw part. So same deal as the lower jaw, I am mapping out a gum line and making sure it is symmetrical to the lower part of the jaw, and it's going to provide a proper coverage. And then I can start adding in the detailing like the teeth and any more detail work that needs to be done. So just marking out where I want these teeth to sit, just creating some little wells in the gum line so the teeth have somewhere to sit and I can combine it to the same side. And just doing a little bit of prep work before I start sculpting the teeth. So I roll out equal parts of clay for each tooth to make sure they're all the same size. That's a little bit of prep work goes a long way and it makes the process a little bit quicker. So I always like to just do little balls roughly the same size. That way we know all the teeth are going to be the same size, and then I can start sculpting everything. Alright, starting off with the front teeth, and I need to make sure that the teeth are going to sit perfectly between the top jaw. So this part's a little bit more tricky, a little trickier just to make sure everything lines up and is sort of symmetrical, it sits well and it closes well. So a little bit more prep work for this one. So I usually go back and forth to make sure everything's sitting correctly, and when I go to bake this other half of the jaw, I'm going to bake the jaws together so it retains its shape and it doesn't sort of warp a little bit. So sometimes it can warp in the oven a little bit, so it's always a good tip to bake the two pieces together and then they don't have a chance of warping. So now for the back teeth, I have the little trident shaped teeth again, which I sculpt individually, and I just make sure, again, going back and forth to make sure they're sitting nice and flush between the other side of the jaw. Okay, moving on to the eyes. So I'm doing some prep work for the eyes first. I'm going to leave this to dry overnight before I start sculpting anything and embedding this into the head. So I am using glass cabochons with just plain ones, and I'm going to be painting these eyes. The eyes are pretty much black, all black. There's like a slight brown iris towards the edge. So, I mean, I included that just for realism, I guess. But I'm using water-based acrylic paint to paint majority of the black, and then once this is dry, I'll go, or at least touch dry, I'll go and fill in that brown iris area with the same acrylic paints. I use chromacryl. I've never had a problem with embedding this into my polymer clays or resins, but just do a little test patch if you're going to do something similar, and leave it to dry for 24 hours before I start sculpting it into the head. Now I'm starting off with an aluminium foil core, and that basically acts as a skull, but the difference is for this one, because it's going to be a movable jaw, I only do the top half of the head really, and then for the lower jaw I have a separate part that I'll sculpt separately, and I basically just cover the entire core with a layer of polymer clay to begin with. So I'm using Sculpting Original here. It's a softer sort of clay, and it's white, so it's really easy to paint over. There's no like bleed through that you can get with grey polymer clays. And I just, do the rough layer to begin with, and then I can start blocking out all of the detail work where I want things to sit and bulking it out. I didn't mean for this doll to turn out so big, but it just did accidentally. But yeah, I think it works really well for this particular doll. It's kind of nice and cuddly. So yeah, I'll continue to block out this head and I'll come back. Alright, so now that I've got the head covered in the polymer clay, I'm going to make a little section for that top jaw to fit into, and then I can start sculpting around it. So I'm just removing a little bit of clay just so I have a kind of more of a flush surface, and just getting the top of the jaw a little bit inset, because I want the jaw to obviously be closable, so you want that lower jaw to sit a little bit inset to the top of the head. Now I'm just going to insert the top jaw area and sort of push it in a little bit, being careful not to break it, and just making sure that I'm getting the jaws to sit correctly. And I'll bake this head separately, and then I'll work on the lower jaw. Just when I'm happy with this, I'll sort of solidify it and make sure, it fits correctly. So I'm just sort of going back and forth between some reference images to make sure it's looking symmetrical and where everything's supposed to be. And then I can start adding the detailing work around the muzzle sort of area and just bulking things out a little bit. Alright, so I've rolled out a thick snake out of polymer clay, which I have then flattened. And this will sort of be the lip line, or like the muzzle lip area that covers the teeth. So I'm going to put this over the top and blend it in. And then I'm going to make sure that lower jaw is sitting correctly inside of that piece. So I'll just get my silicone tool and just sort of blend it in a little bit, just to, blend it in. And then I can start bulking out that muzzle area and make it start taking shape of a leopard seal head. Alright, once I'm pretty happy with the basic structure of the head, I can start working on the eye area. So I add these little bits of clay to the side of the head. Because these cabochons are flat backed, it needs a little bit of clay to push them up so they're not laying too flat against the head. And then you can just sort of position them in a spot that you like, making sure they're nice and symmetrical. So I look at it from all angles just to make sure the eyes are sitting appropriately, and then I can start building up on that eye line. So then I can add the cabochons for the eyes on top of those little eye wells that I created, and I'm just placing them on the top, and then I can look at it from all different sorts of angles and just make sure it's sitting symmetrically and not too like cockeyed, and also sitting in the right direction. So the seal's eyes are sort of off to the side a little bit, so just want to make sure that they're sitting correctly. And then I can start working on some of the detailing parts of it. So I'm just mapping out where I want the nostrils to be. I was a bit in two minds about doing open nostrils or closed nostrils, so I did them like semi-opened, just to give them a bit of character. Then for adding a bit of dimension, I rolled out a little clay snake and added the sides of the nostrils on, just to give a bit more dimension, a bit more character. And just working it in with my silicone tool to make sure it's nice and adhered and combined. Now for the eyelid, I'm doing the same sort of technique but rolling out a smaller bit of clay and just making some eyelids with it. So I wanted sort of like a semi-stern look to this leopard seal, so I just played around with the eyelids a little bit to achieve the look that I wanted. Once I'm happy with the way the eyes are looking, I can start adding the brow line. So again, going in with a larger piece of clay to create the brow and just blending it into the head and creating that look that I want. And again, going in and building up that brow line a little bit more and just making it look a little bit angrier. So once I'm happy with that, I can start building up the sides of the head to make sure they're nice and symmetrical. As this will have a movable jaw, I need to sort of build the lower jaw line so it conceals the moving parts. Okay, now I can start working on the lower jaw, so I'm just covering that foil core with some more of the polymer clay, and I'm going to be adding that lower jaw to the top of it. So I'm just doing a really basic shape to begin with and making sure it's going to fit onto the head properly and doesn't sort of get snagged anywhere, and then I can start adding some more detailing work like the lip line and everything. So for the lip line, again, I've just rolled out a piece of clay in a worm shape and just placing it over the top. This joint is made from a ball and socket armature. I have a tutorial in my shop if you're interested to know how I make these movable jaws, so check that out, creaturesnet.com. And I'm just sort of shaping the jaw to fit where the lower jaw is supposed to fit. Okay, so I'm just going to start doing some more detailing work this time. So I am going to be covering this in minky fabric, a little bit of a different technique, so I don't need to go into too much detail on the actual sculpt. Just need the dimensions right. So just going to fill it up and make sure it's looking right before I go and bake it. And just adding some finer little details around the eye. Obviously you're going to see that part, so I will be painting this area with some acrylic paint. So I'm going to get these areas nice and clean. So I'm just adding a little bit more clay around the outside just to fan out that mouth area a little bit, just around the edges of the teeth. I guess the good part is I only have to sculpt the head and not like feet and paws, so it's a little bit of a faster sculpt, this one. So once I'm happy with the way everything is looking, I can start adding the armature to it. So I'm using a larger armature, I think at 3/4 size, my largest one. So I'm going to pop all these pieces together and then I can start working on the body. So I have stock of these armatures in my shop, creaturesinart.com. Check it out, and I have reels of them. I'm a little bit low on the pliers, I only have one size left, so let me know. I can do some ready-made armatures as well, so I try and be pretty helpful with that. So once I've finished constructing the armature, it's time to start needle felting the body. So I start by curling some pipe cleaners around the entire armature structure, and that basically acts as like a catch for the polyfill that I'm going to be using. So I cover the whole armature in that. It can be any colour you like. You can make it exciting and make it pink. But yeah, I'm going to be using polyfill, which I will then needle felt sort of the muscle tone into the body, so I can place a fabric over the top. For this one I'm using minky fabric, but I'll go into that in a minute. Alright, so I basically just start by curling around all the polyfill around the entire armature, doing a really rough layer of it, making sure it's nice and covered, and then I can start bulking out all of the areas and adding some muscle tone where I need to be added. It takes a little bit long, it's time consuming, but I think it works really well. So the tail and the fin areas are going to be a little bit different, so I'm not going to felt too much. I ended up taking the needle felting off this and just creating the tail and fin pieces separately. So once I've felted the body and it's nice and plump, I can start adding the minky fabric. So I start by adding the torso piece first, just cutting it around the shape really. I don't work with pattern anymore. So basically just pin it all together, trim off the excess, and then add the extremities like the neck area, the fins in this case, and the tail area. And I want this to be quite tight, so I don't want these wrinkles to come out too. So I'm just doing a little bit more of a precision sewing and cutting in this one to get rid of those wrinkles. So I'm using a ladder stitch to sew these sections up, and that basically folds the fabric over on itself and sort of makes a nice blind stitch. But for minky fabrics or fabrics this short, you need to sort of do really small stitches in order for it to look seamless, or as seamless as possible. So this takes a little bit of an extra time. With faux fur you can sort of get away with it because you've got the pile and it doesn't really matter how big or small you do the seams, but for really short fabrics like this, it needs to be really, really small. Alright, so I'm doing a little bit of a different technique to apply this fabric to the face. I'm trying a little stretching technique. So I start off by doing the just attaching that neck piece together on the lower part of the jaw, and I want it to open nicely, so I'm going to leave it to dry open. So what I did was basically apply some glue down the middle of this jawline and leave that to tack off, and then I can start working along the other sides and giving it a more of a trim, and that way I can get the wrinkling out and it's sort of one part is stuck and ready to go, and I can move on to the other sides and sort of pull it to get rid of those wrinkling. So while I'm waiting for that to dry, I'm just going to apply a little bit of paint around the eye area. I forgot to do that before, but now's the right time while that little piece of fabric is drying. Alright, so now that is time to do the other side. So I'm basically applying the glue to the polymer clay area, and then I'm going to give it a trim right on the edge before where the lip line is, so it sort of blends in nicely. And I'm just going to slowly apply it around there and give it a little trim with my scissors and sort of blend it into the polymer clay, if that makes sense. But you can sort of blend it and it sort of looks seamless. So I think this technique worked really well. It was just a total experiment for this one because I don't often use minky fabric, but I think it worked really well. For the tail and the fins, I did a little bit of a different technique as well. So I cut out some patterns that I made, and I'm going to sew these parts up on the sewing machine just because I want them to be a bit more sturdy, and obviously I don't need to do this by hand. I can do it up on the sewing machine. So pin it all together, fabric side together, and give it a little run through the sewing machine, and then I can come back and add all the stitch work into it. So I create like little divots and a bone structure into it, which I use with stitching. So yeah, stay tuned for that one. Alright, and these are the fin pieces, so the same deal, fabric side together, pin them together and sew them up on the sewing machine. Alright, so once they're all sewn out, I can then flip them the right side around and start creating the little stitching structure. I'm going to be using some polyfill to fill the little bone structure things that I'm sewing into. So a little bit of back and forth, but again, total experiment with this one, but I think it really paid off. So I'm basically going in and pinning where I want those stitches to go and sort of flattening it, and then adding a little bit of polyfill where I want those bone structures to go, and then sewing a stitch inside of it to really adhere it down. Now that I've got everything, all the polyfill in and all the stitching done, I can start sewing the tail pieces on. So again, I've pinned them together with the armature inside of it, so it is posable. And then using that same lattice stitch to sew each piece around and sew it all together. Now I'm doing the same sort of technique for the top of the head, except I'm using a larger bit of clay. So I'm applying some glue to the top of the head, like all the way down to the middle, And then I'm going to be applying this piece using a stretching method just to get all the wrinkling out of the fabric. And then I can go and stretch the other sides once this is tacked off. It just does have like, I did have to do like a slight seam line around the side of the head, but you kind of can't tell anymore after the airbrushing. So I blended it in really nicely and tried to be really careful with where I put the glue. But yeah, it turned out super good. So I definitely want to opens the door to doing more animals that have really short fur like this. I think that this technique worked out really well. So I then went in and cut some nose holes into the areas that I'd sculpted out before and sort of blended in that fabric with some glue. Alright, so working on this side of the head now, I am going to be attempting to do the stretching on the side. So basically this is where I ended up putting the seam because it just worked out a bit smoother. It was like a bit of a give and take between what would be better, whether to have a wrinkle or a seam line, and the seam line worked out better. Alright, so to cut out the eye holes where I applied that fabric, and I'm just doing some going back and colouring in around the eyes using some of that black acrylic paint. I will do a little bit of airbrushing around the eye with some black as well, just to get the depth correct. Alright, now going in with my black paint around the lip area, just to create that lip line again. This is where I can start. This is a fun part, adding all the details. After this, I'm going to do the airbrushing, which that was really fun doing the airbrushing in this one. I really liked it. I did a whole lot of mottling effect on this and spot work, so it turned out really well. I really liked doing it. Alright, so I'm starting off with a lighter colour that I've, a lighter grey colour that I've mixed up myself, and just doing them all over coat. It doesn't matter if it's blotchy, because we want that sort of blotchiness. So normally I would do like more of a solid colour, but I think the blotchiness works really well because I added a lot more mottling with a darker grey as well. So just starting off with the first coat on this one and adding some spot work. Adding some spot work underneath the belly. So the airbrush I'm using is an eye water airbrush. It's more of a highline airbrush, so it does finer work rather than big stuff. So I need to look at getting a bigger airbrush that spits out more paint rather than a smaller circumference. So I definitely got to look into that. Right, so I mixed up a darker colour and then went over again with some more modelling and some more spots, and that's pretty much it for this doll. It is available in my shop, creaturesandart.com. Payment plans are welcome, so shoot me a message if you are interested in a payment plan. I'm super flexible, I try to be anyway, and yeah, so check me out, creaturesandart.com. You can find me on TikTok, Instagram and Facebook, and I think that's about it. Don't forget to like, subscribe, all that stuff. I do have a Patreon too if you want early access to things and etc. So catch you in the next one. Bye.